8.1 notes, square roots and completing the square. Solve the equation, hint, use difference of perfect squares. Alright, so difference of perfect squares, if we remember from chapter 5, a squared minus b squared, that factors to a plus b times a minus b. So in this case, a would be x squared plus 3, and b would be x plus 5. So let's see what this looks like. So it'd be a plus b times a minus b. And so I'm going to put those in parentheses because when I combine like terms, I'm really distributing this negative. So combine like terms in the first pair and write in standard form. You get x squared plus x plus 8. And here you get x squared plus 3 minus x minus 5. So I'm just going to rewrite the first trinomial, and then combine like terms and write in standard form here would be x squared minus x, 3 minus 5 is negative 2. And there we go. I'm done. When you have only a quadratic term and a constant, you can solve using square roots. So in our general form, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, you don't have that middle term. When that's the case, you can solve using square roots, which means to isolate the x squared term. So I'm going to add 441 to both sides. X squared equals 441, and then I'm going to go ahead and square root both sides. So let me do that real quick. We get x equals, when I square root both sides, plus or minus 21. Remember, when you square root both sides, your answer must say plus or minus. Okay? Alright, so next, we're going to add 49 here. We get 7x squared equals 49. I've isolated my x squared term, but I still need to isolate x squared. So I'll divide by 7. X squared equals 7. Square root both sides. I get x equals plus or minus. Square root of 7, I cannot simplify that, so I'm going to leave it the way it is. That's an exact solution. Sometimes it may ask you to round to the nearest tenth or to the nearest hundredth. Word problem. The formula s equals 16t squared is used to approximate the distance s in feet that an object falls freely from rest in t seconds. At 2,063 feet, the KVLY-TV tower in North Dakota is the world's tallest supported tower. How long would it take for an object to fall freely from the top? So what we're going to do is plug in this value for s. So 2,063 equals 16t squared. We'll go ahead and divide both sides by 16. So what is that? 2,063 divided by 16 is 128.9375. That's unrounded because I still need to square root both sides in order to solve for t. So if I square root that number, I get plus or minus, and it says to round to 3 decimal places. So let's see, 11.355. My answer can't be plus or minus because my answer is seconds, right? So it would take an object 11.355 seconds to fall from the top. So always write a little sentence to answer the question. Here's another example using square roots. Again, I have an x squared term, although this time it's a binomial squared, but the rules are still the same. I'm going to isolate it. So subtract 5, I get x plus 1 squared equals negative 5. Nope, positive 5. At this point, I can square root both sides. I get x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 5. Last step, subtract 1. And the way we write this, we write x equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 5. This is an exact solution, always written with a rational number first and our irrational number second. All right, completing the square. This is another way to solve polynomial equations. Using square roots is nice and easy, but we can't always use it. Well, if we can make the left side a perfect square trinomial, then we could use square roots to solve. So this process of getting the left side to be a perfect square trinomial is how we can do that. So fill in the blank to make a perfect square trinomial. We kind of did this before. We said, okay, the square root of x squared is x. So x times whatever the square root of this was times 2 gave us the middle number. So we kind of have to go in reverse. We have to start by taking 6 divided by 2, which is 3, and squaring it. So 3 squared is 9. So think about that. Square root of x squared is x, square root of 9 is 3, 3 times x times 2 gives us that middle term. So 9 is that perfect square constant that we need to make a perfect square trinomial. In other words, the number that goes in here is always going to be b minus 2 squared. So let's do that for all of these. Here we go. This is the one we just did. Negative 6 over 2 squared, which is negative 3 squared, which is 9. This would be 16 over 2 squared, which is 8 squared, which is 64. This would be negative 7 over 2 squared, which is 49 over 4. And this would be negative 1/5 divided by 2 squared. So dividing fractions, copy dot flip. We get negative 1/10 squared, which is 1/100th. Solve by completing the square. All right, so we're back to this example. Step 1, subtract the constant from both sides. So the first thing we did was subtract 1. What this does is create room for this new value, which we said is b over 2 squared. So in this case, negative 6 over 2 is negative 3, square it, which is 9. If we're going to add that to the left side, we also have to add that to the right side. So we get x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 8. This is a PST, so we can factor that quickly and easily. Factored version of that is x minus 3 squared equals 8. Then we square root both sides. We get x minus 3 equals plus or minus square root of 8, and then we add 3. So this gives us x equals 3 plus or minus, now square root of 8 is root 4, root 2. So that's 2 root 2. So our final answer there, 3 plus or minus 2 root 2. Let's try that again. All right, first thing we can do is factor out GCF. Then we can divide both sides by 2. So we get x squared plus 5x minus 5 equals 0. Now we want to make a PST on the left, so we add 5. We get x squared plus 5x plus blank equals 5, and remember, plus blank. Whatever we do here, we also have to do here. 5 over 2 squared. 5 over 2 squared is 25/4. So we got to add that to both sides. All right, this factors down to something squared, which is x plus 5 over 2. It's the square root of this, remember, and the square root of this. And then 25/4, 5 is equal to 20/4, so that would be 45/4. We're going to square root both sides. X plus 5 over 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 45/4. Subtract 5/2. X equals negative 5 over 2 plus or minus. Now, square root of 45 over 4 is the square root of 45 over 2. Square root of 45, I know a 9 goes into that. 9 and 5, so that would be 3 root 5. So 3 root 5 over 2. And that's our final answer. X equals negative 5/2 plus 3 root 5 over 2. Last example here, factor out of 3. X squared plus 4x plus 3 equals 0. Divide by 3. That goes away. And now I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides to make a perfect square trinomial. Plus blank equals negative 3 plus blank. 4 over 2 is 2. 2 squared is 4, so 4 goes in here. This becomes x plus 2 squared equals 1. Square root both sides. We get x plus 2 equals plus or minus 1. Subtract 2. So we get x equals negative 2 plus or minus 1. So two things, negative 2 plus 1 and negative 2 minus 1. So x equals negative 1 and x equals negative 3. Those are our two answers. All right, so here's some for you to try here. So if you'd like to, you can pause the video and try these. Otherwise, your homework for 8.1 is on mathexcelforschool.com, due Sunday at midnight.